on getting this up and moving. And as we get started, I want to start with Milo, who's in the chat box right now. Great comment. So Milo was with us last season, and some of the others were with us as well. I know Sheila's class as well. So nice to see the faces we know. Nice to see the new names. I should say faces. It's really the names we know, the names we don't know. And I hope you all are having a great day and ready to learn. This is our first of this season. If you don't know me, my name is Kerry Sautner. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at the National Constitution Center. I'm really excited to start this season off. We have an entire year we're gonna hang out together. As we get started, we're gonna go through a few things, but I wanna start off by introducing our scholar right now, and our scholar is Nick. So Nick, can you do an introduction for us?
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I'm Nicholas Mosvick. I am one of the senior fellows at the National Constitution Center in Constitutional Studies. So one of the things I do is to work with the educational team in Kerry to help put together these classes and to do these sessions. And my background is that I'm both a trained lawyer, I have a JD, and I have a PhD in American history.
So we've got a double hitter with Nick, so I'm really excited. So today's class is Constitutional Conversations and Civil Dialogue. So we're gonna spend 30 minutes, so I'm gonna set up some norms right now, and then we're gonna keep it moving. We're gonna spend 30 minutes talking about some foundational ideas around the Constitution and constitutional questions, and then we're gonna talk about civil dialogue and civil dialogue practice. I think before we have to do that, we're gonna start some norms for us, some civil dialogue norms for us on the conversation that we have throughout the year. So a couple of things. Number one, 30 minutes, and we're gonna do our darndest to keep it to 30 minutes. We have a rule, you say a number, you keep it to that. Number two, we're gonna do our best to break each single class that we have this year into basically 3 sections. And at the end of each section, tee up constitutional questions and dialogue questions for you to answer in the chat box and engage with. We know it's not gonna be perfect, so one of the things that we're also gonna ask you is if something goes a little sideways, that you bear with us. Online learning is really crazy, it's really fun, we're all learning, we're all in this together, and part of it is just accepting that we will not have full control, and that's okay, and we're gonna deal with it. There is a chat function and a Q&A function. The chat function is something that a lot of people love, and they ask questions. Let's always remember to keep the chat focused on the conversations that we're having in the class. If it goes a little chaos or if it gets a little too much for you, hey, do yourself a favor, close the chat. You do not have to keep it open. Some people love that. Some people like to join and chat with each other. Go for it. We want it to be like an open class where you're talking to your friends and listening and having conversations with us. But if you find it's too overwhelming, shut it off. The Q&A function. If we ask you big questions or you really want to understand what's that constitutional question, use that Q&A function. I'll monitor that during the conversation and you can go through there. If you need any help during this time, you can always put it in the chat and I will get back to you. What else? 2 other kind of big things that I wanted to share with you guys, and I'm gonna escape from this for just 1 second, stop share. 2 other big things that are kind of going on that I wanted to share with you were some ideas that came from our high school students as they were doing Zooms last year. So some of our Philadelphia high school students came up with a really great list of norms for Zoom. And I wanna read them off to you. But what I also wanna do is during this class and future classes is I want you to share with me, what are some of the norms you think we should have as an institution for our Zoom conversations? So you can privately chat them to me, or you can send me an email. Everybody got an invite to this, and you should have my email address. Anytime a question isn't answered, constitutional question, or you want to share something with us, please feel free to email us. It's a great way to keep the conversation going. But these sessions are pretty tight, so sometimes we can't get to all the questions. So number one, it's okay. There'll be some layers to this where your ideas and your questions aren't answered. And that means we're not all in control of everything that we can get answered, and be okay with that. So one of the rules that the kids came up with in Philadelphia was own your discomfort. That can be anywhere from something you're discomfortable about what we're talking about the history that we're sharing, It's okay to have a discomfort, and sometimes you don't want to displace that discomfort towards other people. So accept it and understand that you might not have closure with some of these things. So maybe you asked a question a couple of times and it didn't get answered. Sometimes it might not get answered, but that's why I'm going to give you that email address. So if you need something, you can reach out to us and we can help you out. Be present. If you're here, join in. If you don't, you don't always have to watch us. Sometimes there's images that we share during this, and we want to share those images, but they aren't always helpful. So if you're listening and that's how you stay present, stay present. Make sure you're staying present before you're sharing in the chat or before you're asking questions. Because sometimes something was just answered, and when you ask it in the chat, we're not able to answer it because we don't want to repeat. But if you can always, don't worry, watch it again or let us know. Step up and step back. Rule number one, and we're going to talk about this in the civil dialogue section. Seek first to understand rather than to judge. And that's something that adults have to do. It's not just about kids. Kids are, I think, actually better at it than adults. Do your best to think about, what is that person trying to tell us? What is that person sharing with us? First, what is the perspective are they coming from? So step up, pay it, listen, and then step back and try to process what they're trying to share. We have a natural tendency with our brains to try to do rebuttals. And it's the way your brain works. You hear somebody and you want to answer them, or you want to say, no, I think this. That's a rebuttal. We don't want to do rebuttals. We want to do learning and listening for understanding. And that's why a lot of us use notebooks in these classes, so we can write down not what we're saying, but what somebody else is saying and what they're sharing. And that goes for the chat too. And then the last and final one that I thought was a really great one to share is no assumptions. The experience of others, it may not align with your own, and that is okay. So don't assume what you think about something is the way somebody else does as well. We're all coming to this together from across the country, and really, to be honest, from across the world. And that is a great way to kind of start and saying, you don't know where they're coming from, so let's listen and hear each other out. Use that chat box to share out. And before we kind of dive into this and get started, I wanted to check and see if Scott Bomboy needed anything from us before we start moving. Scott? I think he's good. And I am back to being host. So what I'm going to do real quickly is I'm going to change Scott to be a rule maker. So let's get started. Questions in the chat box before we get started? No, we're good. Okay, here we go. Nick, we're the Constitution Center, and we're going to talk all about civil dialogue. We do civil dialogue about the Constitution. Sounds like Captain Obvious, but it really isn't. So can you give us a little founding and basis around the Constitution and what our students during the course of this year, and when they have constitutional conversations, where they should look to and where they should focus on?
Yes, so basically the best way to answer this is to go to our goal. And I think our goal here in the session, and really, of course, going forward, is to give you the skills necessary to engage in what we call constitutional conversations, which is suggested by the title of this session. So broadly speaking, our approach has three main components. The first is to build a historic foundation through storytelling. The second is to learn how to approach and interpret the Constitution like a constitutional lawyer. And the third, finally, is to develop the skills, as we've been talking about, of civil dialogue and reflection. So we start by building a strong foundation by telling the Constitution's founding stories. So any of you who are with us in the spring would recognize this approach, where we start with two things. We start with the Constitution's text itself, right? Always the Constitution. And we start with how not only has the court, the Supreme Court, and sometimes other courts interpreted the Constitution over time, but what the founding stories were, right? What the founders of the country did in creating the constitutional text, what inspired them, what the people at the time may have believed or understood those rights to mean. We talk about all those things. And second, we teach learners of all age to separate their political views from their constitutional views. And I think this is what's really important, right? Is we're asking everyone here not what the government should do, which is the political question, right? If you believe in a certain political program, you think that the government should do something, they should enact a program. But what we're asking here in these constitutional conversations is what the Constitution allows the government to do, what they may do, right? As opposed to what they should do. And that's a really important distinction. And then finally, we're trying to give students the resources that they need to think like constitutional scholars. And that means presenting the best arguments on all sides of a constitutional issue and providing helpful educational resources and platforms to support this civil discourse within the classroom and then broadly across the country, right? And this is the idea here, right? Is that we're going to explore all sides of the issue and all approaches to answering these questions, as opposed to just giving one version or one side, right? That you might do if you were, again, advocating for a political position. With that, I'll go ahead and let Kerry step in unless you want me to keep going.
No, and we're going to go quickly, guys. So, yeah. But you're right. And I think it's really hard to understand what the heck is a constitutional issue. But you have to think about it. Like, first, we'll go to the Constitution and we'll check it. But it's about what may the government do. I know we talked about that a lot in the past sessions, but for everybody that's new, the question always starts with me is like, can the government do that? Are they allowed to do that? But I'm not talking about like Facebook or, you know, like Target. I'm talking about like the United States government, you know, but you have to think differently. And this is the hard part, is like, you think big government and you say, can the national government do that too? But guys, a real quick question for you is, do you know where you probably interact with government every single day? So when you ask the question, may the government do that? Or can the government do that? That's a constitutional question, but what's the government you probably see every single day? And maybe right now you're connected to it. Any guesses? You can put it in the chat box. Not yet? Oh, social justice. Yeah. So if you're thinking about social justice in the advocacy, like if somebody went to do a protest, very good, Milo.
There you go, Milo.
School. There you go, the school. So, but protests on the streets, if you are walking in a street, especially a government, where in the news, very good. School, news, very, very good. I don't know what ASB stands for, but if you want to go further with that, I'll take it. Now, let's be honest, it's not all schools. We're going to talk about public schools and charter schools. We wouldn't say that would be the same case for private schools. Association and student body government. Thank you, Lisa. That's really helpful.
If it's a public school, right, then the government may be able to regulate any student body organization. Right? So
real quick, as we go through this, give me the 2-second rundown, Nick, on where it is in the Constitution that kind of sets up this constitutional framing. So when you say, can the government do that? You can start by looking at the preamble in Article 1, 2, and 3 to find out, can they? And then, you know, when we get to that second half, which is like, and this is not what we do at the center, but a lot of conversations you will have with your families, with your teachers, with your friends, are should they questions. And should they questions are typically political questions. We're going to work this year on showing you how to do a constitutional question in every single class. You are more than welcome to do the political questions, and that's a great thing to do at the dinner table too. Your parents may not think that, but it'll be awesome. But we'll give you the constitutional questions to start with. You start them off with constitutional questions. So Nick, where is it in the Constitution real fast?
Yeah, I thought Kerry was asking me if that should be a dinner table conversation. So where we start, we start by talking about the Constitution is, and it's composed of a preamble, 7 articles, and 27 amendments. And we start, as you see here, with the preamble. And the preamble is what the National Constitution Center's model is chartered after, which is we the people, which is an expression of the Constitutional's core principle, which is popular sovereignty, the notion that government is best created by the authority of the people and nothing else, right? So popular sovereignty being the rule of the people, right? And so the preamble establishes that founding principle, right? What the government is and where its ultimate power lies. As Abraham Lincoln put it in the Gettysburg Address, popular sovereignty means government of the people, by the people, for the people. And the framers set out a very basic structure of the national government, which is what we think of as the three branches, right? The legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, which in the Constitution are Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3, right? And I know Kerry wants to give the fast forward version of it, so we don't want to go too in depth into any of those, and other to say that they establish those powers, right? And of course, as we go through these classes, we'll talk more in depth about each of those, because I know that a class for each of those is coming up, so we'll get to them, right? Article 4, that's about the relationship between the states and individual citizens in the federal government, right? And that's things like how to handle the admission of new states, which is the guarantee of a Republican government. That's actually really important in terms of, again, establishing a founding principle of what we mean by this government in this Constitution. Article 5 sets forth the process of amending the Constitution. It's very important because the Constitution itself was actually amending an existing government, the Articles of Confederation, and establishing the same principle, which was to ratify the Constitution. 9 of 13 states had to okay it, right? A supermajority as opposed to unanimity. Article 6 establishes the supremacy of the federal government, most importantly, but also bans religious tests for national office and establishes an oath of office to this Constitution. And then finally, the final article is about how the ratification process itself is supposed to go. Should I say something about the Bill of Rights?
We only have like 2 minutes. So everybody, and then there was a great question in the chat box, it was like, what is the preamble? So the preamble that we typically, when people say the preamble, they're usually talking about we the people in order to form a more perfect union, that beginning sentence of the Constitution. But a preamble is really just like an opening statement. So you could have a preamble to your play and you're gonna like set it up and say, this is what we're gonna do. I did a preamble with social norms today. So it can be a part of an exact document, or it can be kind of the type of intro that you do. But these are all the different sections of the Constitution. We will definitely send you an email with a listing of all these tools, and they're all on the website. We're going to get these all on the website before class starts from henceforth, so you can look at them before class starts, or you can dig into them afterwards and have more fun with it. The next section, the Bill of Rights and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, you can really see this Constitution is chock full of ways that set up this constitutional question. But I want to get, Nick, real quick, because we are in a short time frame this year, to a question for the audience. So here's your question, guys, and you can use the chat box to answer this. So what do you think are some of the most important ideas or principles enshrined in the Constitution, and why? So put that in the chat box, and you don't have to be like, I'm going to cite Article 2, Section 5. And I don't even know if that's right next to them. What are some of the big ideas
there is
in
no
that
Article 2,
Constitution?
Section 5.
I know, I knew there wasn't. I was waiting for you to correct me.
Yeah.
Oh, so great one. So separation of powers, freedom of speech, awesome, separation of powers. And that's what I love about these concepts, these values. We need to talk about them too, because it's hard to find separation of powers directly in the Constitution. It's all in there. It's like ragu. It's all over it, but it's not like one single section. And we're going to have a class on that where we can dive into it. Freedom of speech is a part of the First Amendment. Awesome. Freedom of speech, the press, religion, speech. Awesome. Everybody loves the First Amendment. It's a big hot one. Taxation. Wow. Usually not said, but thank you for sharing that one. Preamble. I agree. I think the preamble really sets the stage for the values of our Constitution. Ending slavery with the 13th Amendment. Nice job, Jordan. Freedom of religion, women's right to vote. Oh my God, you guys are really good. Second Amendment, right to bear arms, the preamble. Some of the most important ideas are the people get to have power and speak for themselves. weigh Sheila with popular sovereignty. That is always, and Nick gets sick of hearing me talk about the idea that we the people create this government and we the people are enshrined making sure it's continuing. The idea of people have voice in their government, popular sovereignty. Again, one that's all over. Peaceful protest.
What gave you the impression that I was Elbridge Gary over here? I didn't say anything negative about popular sovereignty.
No, I know you like it too, but you know, you're sick of hearing me talk about it. Okay, great, guys. So we get this idea. So these are all great, big theory, constitutional questions and constitutional ideas that we can talk about. But let's really dive in quickly, and because we went over this a little bit, I mean, what's the difference between a policy or a political question and a constitutional question? So right to a fair trial, another good one. Keep putting them in the chat box. I'm loving them. But Nick, can you kind of break it down for us one more time, the difference between separating your political and your constitutional views, and then why we think as an institution, we should all start with the constitutional questions and almost give us our foundation to move on to those other conversations that you can have anywhere else in your life. We want to be like your basement. We want to be really strong, really sturdy, and hold up your home as safely as possible. So go for it.
Yeah, so we have an example here, and we'll get to that. But I think the idea here, and this goes back to what we said earlier, right, is we're trying to learn how to think like a constitutional lawyer. And as Kerry said, we're going to repeat ourselves here, but it's good to repeat ourselves here because we're trying to set up how we can lay out the arguments on all sides before we engage in that discussion everybody wants to get to, right? In other words, it's let's set ourselves up with what the actual constitutional arguments are here before we get to any of those policy arguments, right? And so that means when you read the Constitution and interpret its text, what you want to start with is to focus on how the Constitution either expands or limits the powers of the government, because this is how constitutional scholars read and interpret it. So the key is we're talking about is we're separating our political views about what should be done, right? Is this question says here, right? Should a public school principal search a student's locker, right? In other words, the question there is it a good idea? Is it something we want to have happen, right? The constitutional question, right, is what can be done, right? Does the Fourth Amendment restrict the power of a government employee, a public school principal, from searching a student's locker? Or if it does restrict it, does it depend on context and factual circumstances, right? In other words, what did the principal know? Why is it he was searching the locker? What was he looking for, right? Things that courts actually tend to ask about situations like that, right? And all those questions are not policy questions, right? But are aimed at answering the constitutional question about whether or not the government does have power to do such a thing, right? So I think that's what we're trying to get here, right? In other words, we're thinking of sort of the path we want to take to understand these questions, and we're starting with the Constitution in this text, right? As opposed to that policy question.
I think that's a great question to ask. So why don't we jump into it? Like we're going to get into this in a second. We only have like 5 minutes left, but so let me ask you guys. So here's the constitutional question. Does the Fourth Amendment restrict the power of a government employee, like a school principal, from searching a student's locker? Now, right now, many of you don't have lockers. You don't have them to access. But when they do, does the Fourth Amendment restrict? So does it stop the principal in some ways from searching the student's locker? And then we're going to flip this on its head. We're going to ask the same question, but I'm going to ask it when the student's on the street. So some people are saying, yes, the principal can search the locker. It can be searched. Sheila said yes, but other people are saying yes, the principal is restricted. So it's back and forth. It's supported by true statements. If it's supported by true statements, nice. I like that, Isabel. That's a really good one. Yes and no, always a great answer. We talked about this last year, and another norm that I totally want to add to this is maybe and yes and no, and it all depends. It's totally acceptable constitutional statement. It can be searched. Is Jordan good? I love Sheila's feeding in the student answers. This is awesome. So Nick, really quick, students in a school, and can their locker be searched in a public school? So let's frame it a little bit for you. So in a public school, a principal wants to search a student's locker, can they?
They can, and they're not in all circumstances, but they can. I know Kerry also mentioned if they're on the street, and that is in a different circumstances, and it's actually important why. Because the reason why a principal generally can search a student's locker is because it's in the context of a public school, right? If you're on grounds and if it's related to keeping the decorum and the good order of a public school, that is what gives the government employee, the principal, the constitutional power to do so, despite the First Amendment rights and the Fourth Amendment rights of students, right? Whereas if you're on the street, it's different because you're actually no longer in the school context. So now we're asking a question of generally, why can police officers search someone on the street? That would get us into Terry stops, which Kerry loves to talk about, right? But that generally has to do with reasonable suspicion and whether or not an officer, given the circumstances on the street, has suspicion to pat somebody down, right? But that is actually a different set of circumstances.
It is, and that's why when we talk about all these, so many of these cases, so many of these constitutional questions, where matters. So inside a school is more, I always say it's like a protected place. And so inside a school is a little different. So teachers and principals have more authority than they would if you were on the street. And it also depends if you're outside, but you're still on school grounds. So there's a couple cases that you can look into, and we can send you the links for. TLO is a locker case that if you don't know, you would love it. Another one is Bong Hits for Jesus. What is that's not the exact name of the case.
No,
or is it?
It is not. It is not.
Sorry, that's how everybody knows it as.
But that's how everybody knows. It's Morse versus Frederick from 2007.
Thank you. Morse versus Frederick. We'll send you the links. Go ahead.
And it does hinge on what counts for school grounds, because there is, we'll talk about when we get to it, is that this kid is literally across the street from school grounds. So he seems to be technically off grounds, and yet the Supreme Court says that the principal can punish for having this sign. I also note that Renee gave a helpful little response in the chat there. Yes, what we didn't really get into is what we're talking about is that principals, there's a lower standard in the public schools for what's required to search somebody. And that's what we're really saying is the standard is actually lower than it would be in other contexts. Just like the difference between being in your home and being in a car. Context is very important.
Huge. And that gets us to the other case was Kerry v. Ohio. So if you were walking down the street, can a police officer, again, another government person, so you have to think about, can the government, because these constitutional questions are around that, can a police officer search your bag? And it goes back to what are the standards, what's the expectation of privacy? We'll dive into this deeply when we get to Fourth Amendment. And also it weaves into First Amendment as well, into those classes. But what we wanted to do was just give you one that we all know, like we all know and feel this, like somebody coming and looking at my stuff, are they allowed to do that? That's a great constitutional question, but we use it as a tool to say, this is a constitutional question. It's not should they, can they, may they, all those things. So I'm gonna move us along a little bit quicker because we are almost out of time. I think we have 1 minute left, so many pieces in here. And again, all this PowerPoint, all the briefing documents, everything that you want to need and use are on the website, but we will also email it to each other. One of the things that I want to kind of share with everybody real quickly, this little Justice Breyer chat here, I think, is what I need to do, is something from Justice Breyer, because I want to ask you guys as we leave, what are your rules that you use for yourself to set up a healthy civil dialogue? So advice for an argument, Justice Breyer shared with us, stay calm and listen to others. That's his like rule number one. Don't try to combat what they're saying in your head. Push that to the side and just listen. I think the hardest thing about having a dialogue is realizing that 90% of it is stopping your brain from talking, or at least my brain talks constantly, and keeping your brain as quiet as your mouth and listen. He likes to write things down in notebooks. When I heard him give this lecture that he does that, I started doing it because I'm like, you're right. I forget what I was thinking about what they were saying, and I forget what they were, the argument that they were making. I'm going to jump back a little bit. Their conversation, he always says that the court, even though they disagree on things sometimes, it's always polite, it's always professional, and it's always civil. Now, I want to caveat this with, it doesn't mean people aren't emotionally invested in their perspective and their constitutional conversation, and they can get really excited about it. I get really excited about everything, but you're still being open and civil and listening, and you're being really attentive to what somebody else is saying. And they're listening to one another, even though they might strongly disagree. It's okay to not be on the same page. It's okay if you don't agree. That's something I think we all need to get used to. And the other one is they never raise their voice. They never shout at each other, and they are never rude to each other. And they don't ever put each other down. So they listen for understanding. They are emotional about their perspective, but they're also respectful from different perspectives as well. So as we end this, what I'd love to hear from you guys is, what are some of the things, and I can see it in the chat box already, what are some of the things that you do? What are some of your norms in your life, in your Zooms, in your YouTubes, and your classes that you try to follow to make sure that you have a civil dialogue? Trying to check your emotions. You know what? I think that's a really good one. I can't fully check my emotions. So what I sometimes do is I write down my emotions, because at least that's how I check it, is I put them on the paper, and then I say, why was I having that reaction, and where did that come from? Ooh, Kurt, that's a really good one. Don't generalize or project your feelings or thoughts on others. That's what our high school kids said in Philadelphia. Just because it's your reality doesn't mean it's their reality. So own that as yours. And that's a way to kind of understand your own emotions. Try to understand both sides. Good one, Jordan. That's a really good one. I'm gonna go through and make sure I'm not missing any. Don't you need a permission from a judge? Oh, okay, Sarah Lee, I'm gonna hold that, Sarah Lynn, I'm gonna hold that question till the end, because it's a really good one, but we'll get back to it. Try to check your emotions, show respect for others' opinions. Nice, Isabel. Have empathy and put yourself in people's shoes and wonder, what would they do if I did this? Matthew gave the idea above. That's a great idea, Matthew. Empathy is huge. And we know what's a really good way to understand somebody's empathy is listen to their story. So stories, it's been scientifically proven by neurologists or brain scientists to be able to help you understand what somebody's feeling when you hear and listen to their story. So that's a great one. There's a ton of research to support your answer there. And that's another thing that we do as constitutional teachers. We support answers with evidence. We say, hey, in Kerry v. Ohio, they said this. This is what the case saw. That's a really good way to have a constitutional dialogue and keep it healthy, that you're bringing evidence to the table. That's an awesome one to add in. Direct your comments to the group as a whole and not direct it to one person. Another good one from Isabel. And try to figure out why the other side has that point of view. I think that's awesome. That's absolutely what, from Lauren, that's what Justice Breyer said, the same thing. And Mila just asked a great question. What time does this class end? This class ends right now. So I want to thank you guys very much. It was a great first session with you. It feels too short, and I'm going to miss you guys already. But remember, we're doing this class all week. At 2 o'clock, we have the high school and college level. On Wednesday, we're doing a 2 o'clock session, and on Friday, we're doing a 1 o'clock session. These are all Eastern time, so sorry to sound like an East Coast person. We just picked Eastern times to make it easier for everybody to do the math. Please come. You don't have to go to one class. You can go to more than one. Don't try to push your opinions on others. I will not, but I would love to see you again. That's just my request. And at the end of this, I will go back to Sarah Lee's question. Thank you guys so much. What a great way to start. We hope we have civil dialogues every single week for the entire season that we're going into, and we have a lot of stuff to talk about. Thank you guys. Thank you, Nick, but Nick, don't leave because we're going to answer Sarah Lynn's question if she's still on here.
Okay.
Wow. Bye, Milo. Nice to see you, Milo. Missed you guys. Thank you guys for all joining in your class. Okay, the question for Sarah Lynn, if everybody's waiting on bated breath who's still holding on, Sarah Lynn's question was, doesn't a judge need to weigh in before you're allowed to search a house? I thought that was a great question. Do you want to answer that real quick?
Yes, generally speaking, it's true. We're referring to the warrant requirement of the Fourth Amendment. And when we get to the Fourth Amendment, we'll talk about that because there are exceptions to the warrant requirement. But generally speaking, yes, in order to search, you have to go to a judge and say what it is you're looking for and why you're looking for it, basically.
Give good reason and another section of the government to check you. So awesome. Thank you, Nick. But generally speaking, but not always.
Oh, always.
Not always. That's always it. Not always. It all depends. Thank you guys very much. We're going to wrap up and I'm going to end. I should probably stop. You're going to have to remind me. Going to have to remind me of that.